Faye did not just fire Sonko, he may have just handed Senegal back to the forces the revolution promised to bury, and the men who once shared a prison cell now share a silence heavier than any sentence. Faye is the president, and Sonko is the man who helped to put him in power. 11:15, Friday night, May 22nd. Most of Senegal was already asleep, but the presidential aide read it like a weather report. The duties of Ousmane Sonko are ended. No resignation, no explanation, just one sentence, one signature, one prime minister, gone. But then came the second line, the one that made the room go cold. The entire government dissolved, not a reshuffle, an execution. Within 30 minutes, students poured into the streets of Dakar, not because they had a plan, but because they had a wound. They were not chanting for the president who signed the decree. They were chanting for the man whose name was just erased from power. Faye betrayed Sonko. That is not analysis. That is what the crowd screamed into the night. And when a crowd screams the same sentence across a capital city at midnight, you do not ignore it. You trace it back to the source. But to trace it back, you have to go back. The prison cell. Two men, both tax inspectors, both turned revolutionaries, both jailed by Macky Sall's regime, 10 days before the election that would change everything. Ousmane Sonko was the fire, the voice, the gravitational center of a movement nobody saw coming, but the state barred him from running. So Sonko did something unprecedented. He handed his fire to a quiet man with a steady hand, Bassirou Diomaye Faye. The slogan was absolute. Diomaye is Sonko. Sonko is Diomaye. Not a campaign line, a political fusion. They walked out of prison and into history. Faye won 54%, the youngest elected president in Senegalese history, and Sonko became prime minister. But more than prime minister, he became the movement's insurance policy, the man who could never be fired, because firing Sonko would mean firing the reason Faye had power at all. That was the theory, or that was at least what many believed. But the theory lasted less than 14 months. By early 2026, the cracks were visible from the street. Faye began accusing Sonko of running the party like a personal machine. Sonko fired back, accusing Faye of weak leadership and political drift. These were not policy fights, these were survival signals. Two men who once shared a prison cell now could not share a 90-minute cabinet meeting, but nobody believed it would end like this. Nobody believed Faye would actually pull the trigger, because pulling the trigger on Sonko is not a personnel decision, it is political self-burning. And that is where the story gets darker, because if the split was just personal, if it was just ego and power and two men who outgrew each other, the analysis stops here. But the crowd did not stop there. The crowd smelled something else in the air. Paris. You cannot understand the accusation without understanding the symbol. For 300 years, France owned Senegal. For 65 more, it kept military bases on Senegalese soil. When Faye and Sonko rose, they promised to bury that relationship, not renegotiate it, bury it. Faye delivered the headline. French troops withdrew in July 2025. The photograph of French soldiers boarding planes out of Dakar was supposed to be the revolution's victory banner. But then Faye went to Paris. He met Macron. He pursued what diplomats call a reset. Revolutionary supporters have a different word. Capture. Sonko cancelled his first official trip to France. No explanation. Just cancelled. Meanwhile, Faye was making financial commitments to the same state whose soldiers he had just expelled. The contrast was not subtle. One man stood his ground. The other man was photographed smiling beside the French president. But here is the turning point no one saw coming. While the streets were burning, leaked documents from the Ministry of Finance suggested a hidden deal. The IMF was demanding a massive, painful cut in subsidies to unlock $1.8 billion in relief. The data shows Senegal's debt is at 132% of GDP. If those subsidies remained, the state could face a fiscal crisis within months. Perhaps Faye wasn't just captured, perhaps he saw a math problem that Sonko refused to solve. Critics argue this was a cold-blooded survival move. Faye's defenders claim he was simply preventing a rival center of authority from paralyzing a government in freefall. To stabilize the economy, he may have concluded he needed a cabinet that answered to him, not to a revolutionary rival. He didn't just fire a man, he maybe tried to fire the paralysis itself. But by doing it, he made the optics of French puppetry impossible to shake. While the IMF deal looms, the public sees the handshake in Paris and the firing in Dakar as two sides of the same coin. France is no longer just a foreign power, it is the convenient scapegoat for every hard choice Faye now has to make alone. Sonko walked out of office, but he didn't disappear. He walked straight into the hearts of the people who felt betrayed. Tonight I will sleep soundly, he told the press. He knows he doesn't need the Prime Minister's office to cripple the presidency. He holds the party, the street, and the emotional narrative. Faye is now the most powerful man in the country, yet he has never been more isolated. The National Assembly remains a stronghold of Sonko loyalists. The electoral code has been shifted, clearing a path for 2029. If the revolution is fracturing, it is because power, once shared, rarely remains that way. Faye chose the state. Sonko chose the movement. In the end, this isn't just about a broken friendship. It is a warning to every movement that rises on the promise of total change. A state that is too small for two men will eventually destroy them both. The revolution did not die in the streets of Dakar. It died inside the palace, where power turned brothers into rivals, and where the cost of winning state control was the very thing that made them who they were. The transition from martyr to monarch is never clean, and in Senegal, the price is being paid right now. But history rarely ends when a man loses his office, because just days after his dismissal, something extraordinary happened. The same political machine that carried Faye to power opened another door for Sonko. Behind the walls of the National Assembly, allies moved quickly, and when the votes were counted, Sonko had not been pushed to the margins of Senegalese politics, he had been repositioned at its center. As Speaker of Parliament, he now sits in a position from which he can shape laws, challenge the government, and remind the country that revolutions do not belong to presidents alone, which means the real question is no longer whether Faye defeated Sonko. The real question is whether he accidentally created a rival with fewer responsibilities, fewer constraints, and just as much influence. For now, Faye controls the presidency. Sonko commands a movement, a party, and a legislature filled with loyalists. One holds the machinery of the state, the other holds its political heartbeat. And somewhere between those two centers of power, the future of Senegal is being negotiated in real time. The alliance that shocked Africa is over. What comes next may be even more consequential, because history has not chosen its winner yet. Faye has the state, Sonko has the movement, and Senegal now stands between two men who once fought side by side for the same dream. The question is, who will emerge stronger when the next chapter is written? Tell me what you think in the comments.